Hello, my name is David and I wanted to tell you about a horrible experience that I lived together with my family that made me develop coulrophobia. I will explain to you. It all started when my father managed to buy a house at an auction. From a bank. In my family, I have my father and my mother. I am a son. Unico, and until then we lived on rent. I was 10 years old at time. As soon as my father managed to buy that house, we scheduled the moving. When I went to see the house before we moved, I found it horrible. It was old, ancient, and ugly, but it was no use complaining because the people would live there anyway. A week or so had passed and we had moved to there. My father was already starting to renovate the house even before we to move, and when we arrived at the house, she was much older than what we thought. There was even a space between the walls of the house. My father then knew that he would have a lot of work ahead of him to leave their way. The house itself was quite big. It had 2 floors, basement and attic, but I don't know why I didn't feel well there. I felt observed was very strange. My parents thought the house was super normal, and they said it was normal for me finding the place strange, as it would take me some time to adapt to all that. I already thought the house was haunted by something. Out of nowhere, I started hearing some strange noises in the house. It looked like there were people walking between the walls of the house. It was scary. I even told my parents that none of them gave me much ball. They thought it was something in my head to get attention. And for me, the noises wouldn't stop. I started to get scared. I heard them in every corner of my house. Even in the basement and attic, I started to hear these noises. They sounded like footsteps of a person. I even followed the sound until and disappear. Then I had the idea that it was a ghost in our house. At the same time that I was excited, I was very scared because it was really a ghost in our house. I was literally living in a haunted house. I tried to tell my parents. They didn't believe nothing I say until my mother came to listen to the such steps. It was pretty weird, and the weird things didn't stop there. Our power started to be turned off a few times when my dad went to see. The housebreaker was knocked out, and that was very strange because there were only 3 of us. I soon thought that it was to scare us and that it was the work of that ghost. I got curious and asked my mother who were the former owners of that house, and she replied that the house had been empty for a while and that the former owners had left the country. I found it strange, and one day in the middle of the night I saw with my own eyes that ghost. He was at the door of my office. He wore a horrible mask and his clothes were very old and dirty with dried blood. It was a bizarre scene to see. When I looked again to make sure it was what I was seeing, the clown was gone. I ran back to my parents' room and woke them up saying that there was a sinister clown in the house. My father soon turned on all the lights and left look for this clown, but he couldn't find anything. I was afraid to sleep alone in my room and asked to sleep with them. The rest of my night was peaceful until the next day the noises came back. Could it be him? That macabre clown I had seen? My mind started to fill with doubt and fear too, of course. About 2 days later, I saw the clown again in my house at dawn. This time he was in the kitchen with his back to me. I was terrified and ran into my parents' room. We found it very strange that this story was repeating itself. Again, my dad went looking and couldn't find anything. The following days, everything was the same. I heard noises, the housebreaker was knocked, and we were without power. It was very strange, all this, and I kept telling my parents that the house was haunted, and this time they started to believe it. At dawn, I avoided having to go down to the kitchen or use the bathroom because I was afraid of seeing that hideous clown, but sometimes there was no way and I had to go. But I started to see him walking outside, in the backyard, always walking between the windows. It chilled my spine. I was freaking out until one night the climax happened, if I can call it that. That's when the breaker hit again and we were in the dark. It was late at night and it was raining outside. When my dad went to turn the breaker back on, we were startled by his scream and we ran to go there and look. And to my total despair, it was that macabre clown. He had stabbed my father's arm. When he saw me and my mother started running towards me and my mom, and Gay ran to the stairs to access the second floor. But the clown was faster and stabbed my mother in the calf. She then fell to the ground and the clown climbed on top of her. With a sharp knife in his hand, he tried to pierce her who held her his knife with my hands, and I ran to him to try to help. I pushed him down the stairs, and when he fell at the feet of my father who had an iron bar in his hand and began to strike his head of the sinister clown who had no chance and no reaction. My father hit with the iron bar until the clown's head split open and his brains spilled out on the floor of the house. My mother called the police and the ambulance and our house was closed for investigation. That ghost clown was actually a maniac who lived between the walls of our house. I kept walking. That's why I heard so many footsteps, and continuing the investigations, they found the remains of 2 other families that this madman managed to kill. Very sad. Today he got life imprisonment and will die in jail. And for us, we sold the house and we bought another one. In this one we only had good experiences different from the old one. I will always be afraid of clowns, and we were very lucky not to have dead to that madman.